Faith and Failures Podcast.
I want to say thank you for joining us. Today we have a special guest, BJ Garrett. She is an author of how many books now?
Well, full author of one book, and then I've been a part of several others. I have to think 3 others, and I'm currently writing my full second book. So,
Cool.
Yeah.
So now we talked a little bit before the show. I actually, when I first started this podcast, I tried to dabble a little bit in video stuff before I got to all the equipment I have set up now.
A little different today.
It's quite a bit different. I looked at it before we started, and it was 4 years ago, almost to the day, and it looked like junk. So we're going to give you a much better version, and I'm very excited. So as you probably saw by the thumbnail of this video, it is not clickbait. She has a very unique story. The first time she came on, we talked about abortion. She walked through some of that. So if you don't mind, if you kind of a new audience, if you want to kind of start from the beginning and kind of tell your story.
Absolutely. So, just to kind of go way back, I grew up in extreme poverty, We would often not have electricity. I don't remember ever living in one home for a full school year, ever in my life. And so basically wherever we could get the money for a place to live, that's where we would be. And specifically, my mom was in and out of jail a lot. And so we would stay with family members. I was never part of the CPS system specifically, but very much in foster care, kind of whoever would take me in for different seasons. When I was with my mom specifically, she was very ill mentally, never diagnosed with anything that I know of specifically. So I don't have a title to give it, but she had to be mentally unstable. And ultimately she would, from as early as I can remember, would basically trade me for whatever we needed. I was the payment for rent or utilities or a water bill or specifically, I talk about this in the first book, but...
and what's the title of that?
Unwanted No More, From Exploited to Embraced by God.
That's right. That's the one I think we really talked about the last time you were on. So on that note, you think she was mentally unstable because she was doing this as a mother or a lot of other things? Well,
that and just her sporadic behavior on everything. She went to jail for stealing cigarettes. She didn't smoke.
Wow.
So, that's just one tiny thing. One time I went to jail because she had stolen a check from my bank account and wrote a hot check in my name.
Wow.
And then didn't, take ownership. And then what's so weird about that though, Stephen, is through the process, now this is a years long process of figuring this out. She had stolen a check from my checkbook to write a check at Walmart for $386.23 for my children's Christmas. Because she couldn't bear the thought of thinking that my kid would go without Christmas.
Well,
so
you had to get it from somewhere.
That's what, the very warped thinking.
Yeah.
But somehow also prompted by love, which makes no sense at all. Very unstable, very unhealthy. Excuse me. And so
when she started trading you for whatever, how old were you in that time?
I would say probably from my earliest memory, 9 or 10.
Wow.
May have been younger, but I blocked out a lot of the really early years. But 9 or 10 is when I can really remember.
Wow.
Yeah.
And so during this time, what was going through your mind? You're a little kid. Mm-hmm. It's like when you grow up in something and you don't know it's not normal or it's not right. Did you have any awareness at all that what was happening was wrong to even say anything to another adult, or were you just never around any other?
I wasn't around a lot of other adults, although obviously I lived life. I went to public school. I remember at one season just thinking, how does no one see me? Because I would show up to school and we were in church. We were in church all the time, by the way. So if you think this is not happening in your churches, you've lost your mind, because it's happening in your church. It's very well concealed in the church.
Now, was your dad not in the picture at all?
Not for
Or
most of
biological?
it. So it's very confusing because my mom and dad were not together most of my life, but also my dad was one of my primary abusers. And so you take, not only was my mother trading me for whatever we needed, and at the time it wasn't called sex trafficking. Like now we have this big fancy name, familial sex trafficking. That's a thing today. 40 years ago, that was not a thing. It was just...
Now, do you think it's because it wasn't known or there wasn't the need?
It was happening all over. It's been happening since Bible times, in my opinion.
Yeah.
It just, no one had a name for it.
Yeah.
It was just disgusting.
Let me shut that door. We got to
We have another guest audience. I guess
Very loud.
Precious.
She is. I was hoping she would be like her mother, but she is like the dad. Loudmouth and screamer. Like, "Rah!"
And like, keep in mind, back then there was no social media, there was no outward public awareness of any of that. And very much in the era where you don't air your dirty laundry, you keep and that's still a little bit today, but for the most part, people are more vocal today, for sure, on all topics.
Right.
But back then, you kept your dirty laundry to yourself. You did not share any kind of family dark secrets, partly because of the shame that it inflicted on you. I mean, I grew up. I mean, it wasn't until, golly, I was in the middle of writing my first book that released in 2019, where I had a writing coach, and I'm telling about some of the abuse, and she's helping me kind of map out how to share it visually, but not graphically.
Right.
And I'm telling her about the first time I remembered being sexually abused. And she said, but BJ, you told me about your dad. And I was like, well, yeah, but he was my dad. Like, it didn't even process. It literally, and this is like after counseling and healing and serving in ministry, it never even, like, in my brain, had not reconciled that my dad was one of my abusers. He was my dad.
Wow.
And so, anyways, just the mind is a powerful tool, but...
So was he the first abuser?
I don't know that he was the first. That's a hard question to answer. No, he was not. He was definitely not the first. But I never even acknowledged that he was one of them, period, until just a few years ago.
That right there in itself is like a new revelation in your own mind. Like,
oh, it was like I was shook because it was just like a whole other process. But again, through that process of healing and just on my journey, like I was the dirty girl. I was the dirty little girl. Everything that ever happened to me was my fault. And it was owed to me, basically. I remember one time I was telling my parents about a guy that I later found out they had actually put me with, but I didn't know that. And so I was telling them about what had happened at this pool with a family friend. And I was told if that really happened, it was my fault. I seduced him. I was 10 years old. Like 10-year-old girls don't know how to.
wow.
10-year-old girls don't seduce men.
Yeah, something's wrong with the brain.
Yeah.
So do you think it sounds weird to ask, but you said it about your mom. Do you think your dad had some mental issues as well, or he was just...
I mean, so, this loose terms, I guess, but you have to, it's a mental issue to be attracted to little girls. You should not do things to little girls, period. No matter how old you are.
Right.
That's not healthy.
Yeah.
So, in that aspect, yes.
Something was off, yeah.
But he didn't have anything else. Like, he worked, he was an alcoholic, but he worked, and in normal social settings, he was normal. My mother was not. My mother had big highs and lows and kind of chaos.
So how old were you? You lived with this until you moved out? Or?
So I actually got pregnant with my first child at age 14. And that's when
From an abuser or a
No,
boyfriend?
from a boyfriend.
Okay.
But a live-in boyfriend.
Okay.
Yeah, at 14.
Yeah, that's a Christian thing to do.
Yeah, I mean, just
Now, were you still in church the whole time?
I mean, for most of it, yeah. And I guess probably in that specific season, not so much. But definitely before that. I mean, I don't remember a time really not being in church.
Really?
Probably in my early teens, I was not so much because I was by this point a little bit more rebellious and beginning to fight off some of the things that were happening.
Yeah.
But I had a, live-in boyfriend.
Right.
That was great. But
I mean, they let that happen. Everything else is going on. Why not?
oh, yeah. I remember one time specifically, this is so dumb. I remember sneaking out of my house to go meet my boyfriend. This was before he moved in. But I didn't have to sneak out. Like, I just walked out the front door.
But I wanted to feel like you were doing something.
It seemed like it was like much more risky if I was like sneaking out my bedroom window versus just being like, hey, I'm going to this party.
Right.
Like, but what that shows me though, and I've learned so much over, God's so good, but is that kids actually crave to be disciplined. And I wanted someone to care enough that I shouldn't be climbing out my bedroom window.
That makes sense.
Even though I knew it didn't matter, somehow in my heart, I just thought, if someone would just care.
Recently, we have a 15-year-old from my previous marriage. He's done some stupid things here lately. And so after we had an intense fellowship with him, just kind of, what's going on? And he honestly said he feels that the attention is more on the baby, which is common. I mean,
yeah, that's normal.
My mom told me when I was 5 and my little brother was born that I went pouting and put a chair in my room, didn't want to eat. I was sitting in the chair in the corner all the time. I was like, I don't remember that, but apparently it's a thing.
Yeah.
And he was just like, I'm just wanting attention. He's still 15, so his brain cells they're gone, but he was self-aware enough to say what he was feeling and then us help him map it out. Yeah. Like he was wanting attention, but he's getting the wrong kind of attention. Yeah. So what do? You were drawn to the negative direction. Yeah. So you want some attention? Well, somebody's going to give me some attention. Yeah. And so he's on the spring break right now with my ex-wife's dad. And so we're kind of like, it makes us reassess things. Yeah. When your kid says something and it's like you thought you were giving attention and you're like, okay, maybe we're not on point like I thought. Yeah. But I mean, in all parents, we all had to learn, you know, the hard way. Yeah. Like I was having a conversation with my daughter earlier at lunch today, and there was a thing a long time ago where she had babysat for this family and she told me this guy gave her creepy vibes. I'm like, it's fine. Well, then later I find out like he really was a creep. And she was at church camp and I completely panicked when I found out some information and about this family. And I was like, I was in absolute panic. Like, oh my gosh, I allowed her to be in this situation and nothing, praise the Lord, nothing had happened to her. And she never went back there again. Right. But that's a normal parent's response. Yeah. That's how you should respond. When you realize your child is acting out in any kind of way or scared in any kind of way, you should respond in that way. My parents didn't do that. My parents were very much, if anything happened, it was my fault. I was to blame. When you had the live-in boyfriend and got pregnant, were you still currency, or had that stopped? No, it had stopped by that point because I was old enough. The last time I remember, I think I was 13. That I remember. I think I was 13. We were living in a home, and this man came in, and he was seriously as old as Methuselah. Like he had no teeth. He was so old. So gross. I mean, not that old people are gross because they're not, but I was a child and in this situation it was very gross. And he came in and I was able to fight him at that point. And he held me down and he said, I paid for you. You will lay here. Wow. And that's the last time I remember because at that point I was able to be very vocal with my mom. And you were how old? I was 13, I believe. 13. Okay. So at least from what you can remember to when you so after that, it didn't happen again? It didn't happen for sale. My mother didn't trade me for anything for currency. But, I mean, we still had inappropriate things going on in our home. But I also learned, keep in mind that it does not make sense how I would immediately turn to the thing that creeped me out the most. But that's exactly what I did. So I learned that my body was how I got the things I needed, whether it was food or attention or affection. My body was that currency. Yeah. And that would actually transition into many years into early adulthood where I would then sell my body. I was then in charge, so I don't recommend, if you've not seen it, don't. Pretty Woman, but there's a scene in Pretty Woman, she's like, I say who, I say when, I say how much. And there's some validation in that because as an adult, here I am now selling my body, but I was in control. And there was power in that because not a healthy power right. in any possible way. Right. And absolute complete brokenness. Man, was I broken. But I was in control. And so it felt
powerful.
So are you an only child?
I'm not. I do have a sister, but I don't share her story at all. So,
but she was around that.
We lived together most of our life. Yes.
Okay. So she's got her own separate story.
She's got her own separate story, and she's not nearly as vocal as I am on anything, and so I respect her privacy.
Absolutely. Okay. I didn't know if you were by yourself or you had somebody else.
Faith and Failures Podcast.